All right, what is up, everyone? Welcome back to another Lure Lab episode here, a part of the Serious Angler Network. This is episode 109, and as always, I'm your host, the captain, Andrew Full. And it's quite cold up here in the Northeast. The big lake is still open, ready to fish if we can get the boat out. But the past week, we've got about 3 foot of snow, and my whole mindset has been digging out my driveway and making sure my kids can get off to school and the wife can get her car out of the driveway. But we're here to talk a little bit of bass fishing. We have Ricky Harris joining us from over at Omnia. And as always, everything that we talk about on this show, as long as it is on the Omnia website, it's going to be linked down there below in the description. So make sure you go over there, check those out. And if you're not a Premium Pro member, you definitely want to look into that because you can put money back into your wallet when you buy baits. So therefore, you can buy more baits. And there's a lot of great features that go along with the Premium Pro membership, like having Navionics and CMAP on your phone, tablet. You can look at contours, bottom hardness, vegetation, clarity, water temps, even from satellite reads. So definitely something you want to check out. And I believe there's a little bit of a sale on that right now as well. So without further ado, though, we can bring Ricky on here. He can speak more to that as well because he's the main guy for us over there. We love it. So let's get Ricky on here. We're going to talk cold water jig fishing today. We've got a few different ones to chat about to help you put more bass in the boat. Ricky, what's up, man? Thanks for joining.
Man, thank you. I appreciate the introduction, and so I'm honored having me on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I thought it would be a decent fit, right? Like where you're at, there's a lot of highland reservoirs. There's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for here? A lot of different styles of fisheries that kind of pertain to this subject matter, right? Like talking jig fishing, and there's thousands and thousands of jigs on the market, but there's only a few really that you want to fish in the winter time. And that's why I wanted to get you on here because I know where you're at and you have a couple great wintertime cold water jig fisheries basically in your back door. So I figured this would be a great time to have you join us here.
Yeah, absolutely. Del Hollow Lake being one, Lake Cumberland being another. Here the kind of southern central part of Kentucky where I'm at. We have a tremendous amount of different fisheries, just like you said. In those highland reservoirs, especially, a jig can be such an effective tool,
Yeah.
especially in the wintertime. For a lot of different reasons we'll get into here in a little bit. But yeah, it's one of the things that jig is so popular really year round. But I think at least myself personally, I like throwing one in the cold water the best. It's sometimes you can catch some of the biggest fish of the year in the wintertime, with a jig.
Yeah.
So
So I'm going to hit with the first question here because before you go on, I want to make sure I lead you into it, right? So why should anglers in the cold water season keep a jig in their hand? Why is it beneficial to keep a jig there in the bite zone?
yeah, a jig is something that you can fish so slow and also fish so quickly in the wintertime. That's something I think cadence is so important in the wintertime, and a jig allows you to really vary from day to day, whether here on whether you're at Del Hollow, Lake Cumberland, any of these highland reservoirs. When you have conditions where you have bright bluebird skies, when you're dealing with big populations of largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass, all three, there's so much to take into consideration there with a jig, and in the cold months, there's times that those fish can pull up and be shallow, and you want to have a jig that you can effectively fish up there. And then at the same time, there's fish that can be out 25, 30 feet, that you can easily target with a jig as well. So I think the biggest thing in the wintertime is it's something for me that it's a confidence bait, because I know, kind of regardless of the stretches that I'm going to be fishing, or, the areas, I know I can effectively fish that jig and typically have some success.
Yeah, absolutely. And the crazy part is like I feel like there's a bunch of misconceptions, right, around fishing a jig in cold water. Like if you talk to 10 different anglers and you ask them what jig they should be throwing, probably half of them will say a small finesse jig and the other half will say a big mop, something that has a ton of bulk to it, and you just keep it there in their face and wait for them to bite it, and the finesse guys will say fish it a little faster. So, like, what would you say are a lot of the misconceptions that you see around fishing a jig in cold water?
Yeah, I think, one of just the biggest misconceptions is, if it's cold water, you have to fish that jig slowly. That's something that, for swimming a jig, for instance, it's a little bit different, but, 50 to 55 degrees is kind of one of my favorite, water temperature ranges to utilize that technique. You go to places like Alabama or Georgia, guys catch a tremendous amount of fish doing that with the jig. So I think this kind of mindset of slowly dragging, trying to fish with these lethargic fish, that's not always necessarily the case in the wintertime. Just like I was saying before, there's periods of time where you have, warming trends, cooling trends, and, all throughout the winter, there's different periods where those fish want different things. You hear guys talk about like jerk baits in particular. So often guys are talking about the cadence and switching up from the pauses to how many times you snap the rod, and even how hard that you snap the rod. And I think it's I kind of try to keep the same thinking with a jig. In the wintertime too, especially is going into that day kind of with an open mind and getting a feel for it. There could be times where, in some of these deeper channel swings or bluff walls, they'd want that jig just to kind of sit almost in the crack of a rock and just hold it there. And, there's other times that you'll catch them almost just kind of slowly dragging it constantly, just at a really slow pace, just letting it come over, some gravel or whatever it may be. So I think that's really the biggest misconception that I see a lot is, guys that they tend to they get out there, they're slowly moving that rod, they're not really moving that jig very much. And, it's something you can eat up a lot of time,
Yeah.
doing sitting still trying to get fish to bite that just aren't going to.
Yeah, it's definitely like it seems like with our understanding of bass, with forward facing sonar is completely changed on the way that they actually perceive and react to baits and bait fish, right? Like we had Cody Huff on the network on Tuesday Night Live, and he was talking about how he doesn't slow down his jerkbait fishing at all in the wintertime because they'll still come get it. They're either going to eat it or they don't. Like he's like, you don't need to pause it for 10 seconds. It's the same way with the jig. I feel like there's no like one size fits all, especially in the cold water, because I mean, you could be fishing, like you said, in 5 to 10 foot of water in bushes or trees or docks, and you might need a certain jig for that, or you could be dragging offshore in something they want it hopped and like slightly stroked or just dragged real slow. So it's just figuring out what those fish want to bite. But today, Ricky, I want to focus on three main jigs, and I'm going to ask you to throw in an honorable mention. So we got four at the end, right? So I kind of want to cover like an Arky style jig and maybe the best jigs there, the finesse ball head, and a mop jig, and kind of the situations where people and anglers are going to want to throw them. So we're going to start off with the Arky style jig. What jig do you think is best for the cold water months, or maybe a couple jigs for our viewers here?
Yeah, as far as looking at Arky styles, one of my personal favorites is the missile baits, the mini flip jig that they have. 3/8 up to a half ounce, so really the two sizes that I really like. And it's really just a jig that I'm confident in year round. And it's really no different
It's
in
a
the
good
winter
one.
time. I think really just in the wintertime, the only difference is the trailer selection that I go with.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's something that has a lot less action, or things like that. But I really like the style of that head, the way that it's made. It seems like the rock and things that we have here in the Kentucky, Tennessee. It seems to come through that cover and things pretty well. We have a lot of lay downs and things like that. As well. And it's one that, around here, especially, you really need something that, it's got a little bit of a durable weed guard, something that you can really get fish in and out of stuff. Some of
Right.
these big smallmouth that we've got, like in Del Hollow, especially, you want something that's got a pretty good hook and, the
It
brush
definitely has that
guard to
for
get
a
it.
small jig.
Yeah. So, but Yeah, and that's another thing that I like too about that missile in particular is it does have a little bit smaller profile than a lot of other jigs. That's
Right.
something that I've found with some of the jigs with bigger hooks. You start getting up into the four, even 5/0 hooks. It's a lot of these smallmouth and spotted bass that you would catch a lot of. It seems like it's almost hard for them to get that big hook in their mouth. So something a little bit more smaller and compact is seems like your hookup ratio to bites is a lot better.
So for the wintertime, what would you say is your favorite trailer for the mini flip? And then maybe like one or two colors that you'll keep in rotation.
Yeah, so really with the trailers, I really go into it kind of with two thoughts. I want something that has a little bit more action, and then something that's really more subtle. So the first trailer that I'll typically go with is a Zoom Fat Albert Grub. That or a Strike King Rage Craw is another one I like to throw a lot. But those two, like I said, with those appendages, they're thinner. They have a lot of action as they're falling, and then two, even dragging them at a slower speed, they still put off a little bit of kick. So, really looking at those, and then kind of more on the chunk side, things like a Zoom Super Chunk
Oh yeah.
is one that I really like to use. Really, the Super Chunk and the Super Chunk Junior are the two that I stick with for the most part. And not really as far as color selection, and not green pumpkin or anything that's brown or orange is really the colors we go with, that or black and blue, if we have,
Yep.
some big rains and things like that, we have a lot of run-ins and,
Don't
uh,
sleep on that black and blue and clear water.
yeah, yeah,
They love
it's,
it.
just traditional wisdom, says that black and blue may not be the ideal choice for clear water, but it's something it's a super effective color for us down here as well. But,
You'd probably laugh at me, Ricky, if I open up my jig box in front of you. I think 90% of it is black or black and blue, and then the other 5% is green pumpkin.
yeah.
Like it's just for whatever reason, I find at all times of year they just love a straight black jig with like a green pumpkin trailer. That contrast is incredible.
Yeah, and mentioning that too, kind of going back to your question before about misconceptions. I think that's another one too that with jig fishing especially is there's 1,000 different colors of jigs out there, and you can get these strands and that strand, and I think it's honestly probably got more to do with confidence than anything. Because just like you're saying, with really leaning towards black and blue, most of the time I'm kind of the same way with brown and orange, and I've found
Yeah.
myself so many times out there, whether it's fishing tournaments or just out there fishing for fun, talking to some other friends or anglers, and they'll be throwing a completely different jig than the one that I was throwing, as far as the color and things, and they still caught fish as well. So,
Isn't
I
that
think
crazy how that
it,
works out that
yeah,
way?
yeah. So I think that's one of the biggest things too is not getting too caught up in the colors. Obviously trying to match the forage that you find whatever lake that you're fishing.
Right.
It's a pretty good rule of thumb, but don't let it get you spun out, because you can. There's a lot of different variations of colors out there. So
100%. So now, where would you fish the Arky style jig like in the winter time? Are you targeting like laydowns and brush piles in the back of pockets? Are you looking for docks? Like, what is the main target choice for you with the Arky style jig and the Ike mini flip? And then from there, take it a little bit further and then talk about your setup.
yeah, so looking at like with these highland reservoirs especially, these fish, as it gets cold in the wintertime, those fish are starting to pull out to the mouths of the creeks. We have a lot of really big, long, winding creeks that what it does is it sets up a lot of different bluff walls or channel swings throughout that creek. So really kind of a general rule of thumb is just starting out, starting from the mouth and starting to work back, or if you want to go to the back and start, I don't think it matters a ton, but just kind of having that starting point and then going from there. And really in all these creeks, you'll kind of see a similar theme of this channel that bends around, and there'll be one stretch where all the contours come together and it's super deep, and you'll find throughout these lakes, there'll be a mixture of rock and wood, brush piles, whether they're man-made or, ones that have just naturally fell in. So the thing that's really great with that Arky style head is just the shape of it, and just with like the weed guard and things like that is comes through that stuff really well. You don't have to worry as much. Obviously with fishing a jig, it's inevitable you are going to get hung from time to time, but
Right.
that Arky style really seems to be so versatile. When you come across different areas, that's one that you can throw and probably will be the right fit for whatever kind of cover you come across.
Yeah, I particularly like an Arky style jig because you can skip it, you can cast it, you can throw it in the crap, right? And it'll come back out kind of. It's like a very universal jig, and it just always seems to get bit. So, what is the setup you use? Like your casting rod, reel, and line?
Yeah. So as far as the rod and reel goes, starting with the reel, I like to use a higher speed reel, something like a 7-to-1, or 8-to-1 reel. And that's the thing with uh, fishing a jig on these lakes, especially. The depth can vary so much. Sometimes you can find yourself fishing, that 20 to 30 feet zone. So something that can take up a lot of line. I really like to have that. Especially the way smallmouth can be even in the wintertime. They hit that thing and they take off flying. You need to pick up a lot of line quick to be able to get a good hook set on them, especially if they're down there that deep. It's just that much more critical to make sure you've got a good connection there before you draw back and set the hook. So
Right.
that's really what I like to look for as far as reels. And then on the rod side of things, just a 7.3 medium heavy is really what I like to go with. With a fast tip. Obviously there's some variance between different brands, but I like something that does have a little bit of give to it. Just for that same reason. Some of those fish can still be pretty feisty that time of year. So, having something that does have a little bit of give, especially if you're up, that half ounce or, maybe even a 3/4 ounce size jig, they can get a lot of momentum and swing that pretty easily. So I personally like to have something that does have just a little bit of give, but, still has the backbone to, if I'm down inside of, a lay down or something like that, I've still got the power to get that fish out.
I like that. That's right where I'm at too. 7.3 is like the perfect length.
Yeah.
And then, are you a fluorocarbon guy? I hope you're not a mono guy, but you're probably a
Yeah.
fluorocarbon guy,
Yeah.
right?
It's
And then
funny.
what pound test?
Yeah, I really look at 15 for the most part. I will go up to that 17, 18 range if it's really really thick stuff. You'll find on some of these bluff walls and things a lot of times that a lot of trees and things will kind of wash into those over time.
Right.
So you will find a ton of stuff to get hung in there. So you can upsize from time to time, but it seems like 15 really for me, gets the job done.
Perfect. All right. Do you think there's anything else we should touch on the Arky style jig before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I don't think so. I feel like that's the Arkansas, like I said, it's one that's so versatile. We could sit here and talk until this time tomorrow,
Yeah.
about all the different ways and things you can do with the Arky style head. But yeah,
Just fish it.
that's
That's the
it.
best part. Yeah, just go fish and go fish the Arky style jig. Find one that you love. I can speak on the mini flip. It catches a ton of fish. It's super compact. It's one that I have quite a few in my box. I'm a big fan of that one. So it's a great choice. All right, ready for the next one?
Yeah,
Finesse ball head, right? Like not your finesse football jig where some people might get confused. We did a great episode about 100 episodes ago on finesse football jigging in the winter, so I don't want to touch on that, but this is like your finesse ball head. If you watch previous Elite Series events, Major League Fishing events, you'll see if they go to a lake in like Alabama or the Carolinas, this is one that a lot of anglers will be throwing up around that shallow cover around docks. So, what is your favorite jigs for a finesse ball head, Ricky?
yeah. So finesse ball heads, I've always been very partial to the jewel finesse jig. It's been one that's been a staple for such a long time, and they've been out. They're in the Ozarks. That area is very similar. To where we're at. Um, and that's I would say Jewel, the finesse jig that they make is probably the one that I throw 90% of the time. It's one that I've really come to grow pretty fond of over the years. But
That's a long-standing name too in the fishing industry, and people don't realize how long Jewel has actually been been around, right? Like, and I'm going to share my screen here real fast because I have it pulled up on the Omnia app so people can get an idea. But like, Juul's been around for years, and they kind of like fade and come and go, right? From what I've seen. But like, what are some of your favorite colors here? Are you like the bass whacker because it's like green pumpkin with the orange?
Yeah.
Or do you like maybe like the brown purple flash? I think that's one that I would pick up. I like that color. What's your favorite color in here?
Yeah, you nailed it right on the head there. So the bass whacker, just that standard, green pumpkin with orange. You can't really go wrong there. But then the other one, it's we always call it peanut butter and jelly. Kind of colored with that brown.
Nice.
Yeah, that one right there in particular, the peanut butter and jelly is like I said, again, just talking about like the variations of brown. Really just kind of try to stick to those kind of shades. Something more like along the lines of green, like a green pumpkin. If you have something like this that's more leaning towards brown with that little bit of purple, and you will see from time to time the craws get this almost just like a little bit of a hint of purple on
Right.
their shell. But really with those two colors, and like I said, your black and blue, you've pretty much got that covered. To imitate them really throughout the year, and really throughout the United States. Any places you go to, with the exception of maybe a few unique lakes, it's you, the crawls you're going to find in that lake are going to match probably one of those three colors.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty universal when you're picking out crowd colors. So, I mean, what are your favorite trailers to put on the Jewel finesse jig? And by the way, I just realized that they come in a 2-pack for $6 for under $6. That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's they're one of the few that actually still do a 2-pack. But that's as far as back to your question with trailers, it's really a very similar theme with me again. The only exception is one trailer that I'll add to, aside from the chunk, and kind of the cooler, temperatures, or if they're just very lethargic, and then the twin tail grub for when it's they're a little bit more active. If it's maybe a warm sunny day, they pulled up and they're actively feeding. But the other one is actually a friend of mine that you mentioned, Cody Huff, earlier, and he and I
Mhm.
actually went to Bethel University together. Another one of our teammates, Brian, he when we got to college, he actually turned me on to using a baby brush hog as a trailer,
Really?
that little Jewel finesse jig. For whatever reason, it's one that's been very effective. He's whooped me more than once, out there on the water throwing that little thing. But
Huh.
yeah,
That's
just
very interesting. That's got to put like quite a big profile on it. And it's got to move quite a bit of water, so it falls really slow, I would assume.
yeah, yeah, it does. And I think
Perfect
that's
for
one
the
of the
winter.
things too that it's a little bit longer profile, but it's still kind of slender. I think it probably almost resembles some small bait fish. Just as much so as it does a crawl. You think about throwing that thing out by a dock, or like just going down some of these bluff walls too, for instance. Some of those sizes, it's really falling pretty slow. So it's kind of a little bit different thought, at least in my mind, on with versus the Arky style, because 99% of the time with that Arky style, I've got it on the bottom or inside of some kind of cover. It's really thinking about that fish coming down to pick it up. Where with the finesse jigs, a lot of times, I really like to think about, well, especially in the winter months, a lot of times we'll have a shad die off and things like that. So, the same time of year where your jerk baits and things like that are so popular because it imitates that kind of dying, struggling bait fish. I think that, little finesse jig can kind of do the same. Because we don't have, huge bait fish on these highland reservoirs like you'll see on like the Tennessee River, where, gizzard shad are so prevalent, and they average, 6 to 10 inches long. So, you're looking at a totally different profile there. But
Right.
but that's what I think, one of the things that makes that finesse jig super effective on these clear highland reservoirs.
Yeah, love it. So, what is your setup for that? You're probably going to downsize your line at least a little bit. So, like, what is your real rod and line setup for a finesse ball head, Ricky?
Yeah, so line, I go down to 12, and there's even times that I will go all the way down to 10. But that's, like I said, some pretty specific cases. And when I go to 10, usually I'll throw it on a spinning rod, but that's I could get way down in the weeds on that with the spinning rods. But just your standard finesse jig, I like to go. Really the same reel, as far as speed and everything. Like, it's kind of the same concept there too. Sometimes you're going to be down there deeper, and a lot of times, these fish, especially, smallmouth, even spots too, in the wintertime, they've still got a lot of horsepower. So, you want to be able to pick up that line quick. But I like to go even a little bit lighter on the finesse jig, something like a 6'10", 7-foot medium, or medium heavy. One of the ones that I've got is a Daiwa, and it's a medium, but it's got an extra fast tip.
Hmm.
And I really like that, having that shorter rod for one thing too. That's one of my favorite jigs to throw around docks and things that time of year. So having that little bit of shorter rod is a little bit easier to navigate. Casting it around and making sure you can, get that quiet entry up and around, the slips and everything. But just downsizing on that a little bit with the line too. I think that helps. I've found more times than not. I've tried going down to that 12 on like a medium heavy, a little bit bigger rod, and it seems like I'm prone to breaking off some more on the hook set and things like that. So just
Gotta stop hitting them so hard.
yeah, that may be my problems. I'm just maybe hitting them a little bit too hard. But no, it's uh, I think just that, really kind of just downsizing the whole setup to really,
Yeah,
match the jig too. And that, that little bit lighter rod too, I think helps me, personally get better feel, as I'm still using the fluorocarbon, but, just having that little bit, lighter setup, it's a little bit more sensitive. And of course, with those ball heads too, you're talking about, quarter ounce, sometimes even, 3/16, stuff like that. So, you're throwing light stuff. So it's, helps with the accuracy and things like that too, casting.
100%. So let's flip the roles here, right? We're gonna go from finesse to big old mop. So like mop jigs.
Yeah.
There's not a ton of them around anymore. You don't really hear about them all that much. They'll make like a surprise appearance on Bassmaster Live from time to time in the cold weather months. But like I feel like this might be one of the most misunderstood jigs on the market, and people tend to shy away from them because they look so big and bulky. But a mop jig, why is a mop jig so good in the wintertime?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that make a mop jig so effective, especially in the wintertime. One with, with the skirt itself, obviously with that living rubber and that big, long skirt, obviously when you've got that jig just sitting there still, that skirt really opens up and it creates, this large presentation, on the bottom compared to just your standard, Arky style or football head, whatever style with just a, silicone skirt. It's got a lot more bulk to it, and it tends to draw some bigger bites. It's you go down to like the Carolinas and things like that, especially. That's one of the things that's really where I guess you'd say is the home for the mob jigs. The Georgia, South Carolina kind of area, but
And
it's one it's super effective, I think, in drawing fish's attention, just because of the nature of every time you drop that thing, it just lays down and spreads out. So it's even even when you're sitting it still, it still has that little bit of motion. And it's one, like you said, it's kind of gone and forgotten about, but there's just enough of us guys that remember it ever so often to catch some fish on it and kind of bring it back to life, it seems.
yeah, I feel like too, like a mop jig can be on an Arky style head or even like a football jig style head too, correct?
Yeah,
So like
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
kind of more of like a pick your poison. If you're out deep fishing like 30, 35 foot of water, I think I would go to a football jig style. That being said, you can throw an Arky style, but a football jig style, just dragging it along, will work better in my opinion. And I could be wrong here, Ricky. So you can adjust. And if like you want to throw the Arky style, like this Buckeye here on Omnia, that might be something that you want to use like up tight on a bluff wall or where a tree is in the water or like brush and kind of just dead stick it there so that mop is undulating underneath the water.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really with the Arky style, the way I kind of think about it is, any wood cover that I'm potentially going to be fishing, that Arky style is going to probably be the way that I go. And then the same with anything that's rock, whether it's, boulders, small pea gravel, some of these bluff walls. What a lot of our bluff walls have too is we call them just shelves, but essentially that bluff wall will come out to 8, 9 feet, and then there may be a shelf there on that bluff wall that is, I don't know, maybe as long as your boat, 18, 20, 22 feet wide. And then you'll have another drop down to maybe 18, 19 feet of water. And a lot of times, those fish will just kind of set on those shelves and things like that. So, being able to kind of drag that football off there and then just let it, almost kind of crash down to that next shelf is super effective.
Yeah, and the mop part's cool to give an idea. Like as it falls off, it might be all compact, and when it hits that bottom, all those silicone rubber legs on it are just going to flare out and poke way out, and the fish is going to see these arms just kind of undulating in underneath the water, and then the trailer and the jig. And I think they're kind of cool to look at. Just if you throw them in a fish tank, just they explode when they hit the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's I think just too with that mop jig, kind of like we were talking about earlier about the forage, in the lakes, places like the Tennessee River, or you get down south, just these bigger profile bait fish. A lot of times they're looking for something that's that size, something like a traditional arky or a finesse, just maybe drastically smaller than what they're used to eating. And that's where that mob jig really excels, I think, in the wintertime. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You have that large profile, but then you're also able to really fish it slow, and target those fish that may be tough to get to bite.
Yeah, love it. So what would be like your overall setup for a mop jig? Are you going to upsize it a little bit bigger than your standard Arky style jig setup, or are you going to keep it the same as the Arky jig?
Yeah, so personally, I really keep it the same as like the Arky jig before, with the 7.3 medium heavy. I tend to find that that's really the standard for me with, really any of those jigs outside of the finesse jig. Fluorocarbon, pretty much the same size, 15 to 17. Like with that Arky style head, a lot of times I'll probably go 17 more so than 15, just because, that's really when I'm throwing that mob jig, my intention is getting it down into some brush, or, they're on a rock pile, or, somewhere where I've found some fish and I want to, have something that's I can keep in front of them, but still, have some movement and things like that without, pulling that away from their strike zone. So,
Right. I get it. Love it. So, ready to move on to the honorable mention jig here, or do you think there's anything that we should add on to for the other three jigs before we do?
yeah, there's nothing I can think of in at the moment. It's I think we've covered it pretty good.
Awesome. So, honorable mention jig, right? Or like the most slept on jig style for the cold weather that we haven't talked about yet. What would that be, Ricky?
Yeah, so it's um, really, I don't know if you technically want to call it a jig or not, because we're talking with no skirt here. So a hula grub is actually something that's super effective. You can put on a jig head with a weed guard. In the wintertime especially, the hula grub or the zoom fat Albert grub, either one can be super super effective. Get its a slender profile, something that's a lot more finesse, like our Highland reservoirs here, especially where you have maybe threadfin or alewives, these smaller bait fish. It's something that can be super super deadly in the wintertime. And just by varying the head size, a little bit, you can really cover a lot of depths, super effectively, from lighter stuff, fishing it up shallow, to some bigger heads. You can get that thing down there super super quickly.
Hmm. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time fishing a hula grub, probably 10, 12 years ago when I first started bass fishing a lot. And I think I have like 15 packs of them, and I haven't picked them up in forever. And every time like a tournament comes, I'm like, I should really rig up this hula grub. And then I'm like, it's just another thing. I probably won't throw it. I'll just leave it home. And I
Yeah,
always forget how effective they are at actually catching bass.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
so thank you. I'll probably forget to like April or end of March when I get my boat out again and be like, oh, I should put these in the boat, and then probably leave them on the shelf again. But
Yeah, no,
I
it's
appreciate it.
I do that more often than not. With I'm not just limited to jigs either. I've got several things. Seems like I forget to bring, and I'm like, man, I knew I should have brought this. But
Well,
yeah, I
it's
think
funny.
that's I think the hula grub is one that's super fun. Just, just clarification for the viewers, the hula grub actually does feature somewhat of a skirt on the top part of it with, the fat Albert grub, that I've thrown a lot of times doesn't have that kind of collared skirt up at the top, but both are super effective.
Yeah.
Especially in those.
Is there a color you like in those? I'm going to assume green pumpkin, but I figured I would ask.
Yeah, this is one that I do like green pumpkin, and there's actually some times that I do like to go with a straight just chartreuse, especially for those smallmouth. Down on the lower end of Lake Cumberland, especially Dell Hollow, you're looking at that super clear water. Chartreuse, any of those bright colors, are super popular, from, bubblegum spinner baits to, chartreuse flukes, and the grub is no different too. A lot of guys have thrown the just single tail on a traditional jig head, fishing it like that for years. And it's just, I think it's a way to get that down in front of a lot of those fish, but still maintain that really small, finesse profile.
Right.
And just kind of thinking along with like finesse jigs too. That's kind of, with my setup, that's kind of how I like to, look at it as the same thing, a little bit lighter rod, lighter line, something I've got some more sensitivity and, just again, with that kind of finesse presentation, using the lightest line I can get away with, typically 12 or 10 in some cases.
Right. Yeah. So I got a question for you real fast, Ricky, before I let you go. Do you want to showcase some fishing reports with these jigs on them?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. So then we'll let you get out of here. So the first one I have pulled up here is going to be the mop jig. And there seems like there's a common consensus on where guys are throwing it in the wintertime down here at Lake Marion, right? In looks like February, in the Buckeye mop jig, 3/8 ounce, black and blue. Must be something about the Santee Cooper lakes that they like that mop jig. But which one do you want to do here? Do you want to do, let's do Lucas, because he's talking about it exactly. He goes, I was pitching big jigs, mop jigs, and other homemade hand-tied jigs around cypress trees. So he's probably making his own mop jigs with certain types of rubber. And in docks close to deep water, these fish are preparing to spawn. Give them another 3 weeks or so, and Santee will bust wide open with spawners. So it looks like he's throwing it just as they're getting like that mid to late pre-spawn period, which is a great time. And then you have Steven here, doesn't talk about, but he's got the mop jig in there. Finally got a chance to be back on the lake, but didn't get one. But the cool thing about these fishing reports is if you want to, as you're on the Omnia app, you can basically go over to your map, right? And you can find whatever lake you want to fish, click on them, see if it'll work for me here. You might have to walk me through this. There it is. There. And then you go up here to your fishing reports, and you can find what everybody's catching them on for the time of year that you may want to visit that lake. So don't be afraid to go over to Omnia and highlight the lake that you want to look specifically on Premium Pro. You can do all your research and find the hot baits for that time of year that you're going to help you put a few more bass in the boat. So, yeah, I like that tool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to touch on that, a little bit more too, you can find them same fishing reports from the products page itself. So, if you were looking at a jig in particular and you wanted to, get a better understanding of how, different people from around the country are throwing that, then we have all that information there right available too, along with, recommended products that, based on those fishing reports that we have, that's one of the things that's super valuable about, being able to provide that information is, then we can give those recommendations about not just the product itself, but, within these fishing reports, if guys are utilizing other products in conjunction, with that jig, then, we want to share that information as well. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can, access and interact with those fishing reports. So, kind of playing around with it and, seeing, there's so many different, ways you can look at it and, shop. That's, that's always been our biggest thing, is creating personalized shopping experience. And, this allows you to do it however you want to, you know.
Absolutely. So let's see here. Now we're gonna pull up the jewel jig as I found him here a minute ago, and I just kind of copied and pasted it. But see if we can find one. I think it was I had it up here, now I lost it. Probably because I copied it over. But there was one in here where he was talking about the jewel jig in the winter time. Might have been Smith Mountain Lake. He was fishing around like ledges as well as isolated rock and brush piles near deep water. That's like your typical spot to throw a finesse jig if it's not around a dock, right, Ricky?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's that finesse jig just allows you to get that, kind of like I was talking about earlier with the mop jig, having that big presentation, I can go into that cover with, it's kind of the same thing with the finesse
Yeah.
jig. If you want that little bit smaller presentation, then you have that ability to, still have that, weed guard and everything, be able to effectively fish it in that cover and still have that small presentation. So
Yeah. So before I cut you loose, I have one last question for you that I didn't prep you for, right?
all right.
So if you could give our viewers advice for throwing a jig in the cold water period, what is the most important piece of advice that you could give them to help them catch more bass no matter what jig they're throwing?
Yeah, I think if I could just give one piece of advice, I would say is just to, um, mix it up, vary your, everything about it from, the trailer to, the color to the cadence, how you're retrieving it. If you're, hopping it, dragging it, letting it stop and just kind of sit, to build that confidence for yourself. It's just like, we were talking earlier about, different guys will go to the same lake on the same day and catch them, fishing jigs different ways. And that's just,
Right.
I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I would give is just, go out there and, spend some time playing around with it. And, don't, each day, don't, assume that it's going to be like the day before, cause it really can change and vary, especially in these highland reservoirs where fish are so susceptible to moving. They can move, up and down throughout the water column. Lake Cumberland, for instance, we were talking earlier, the average depth is 90 feet. So it's a super, super deep lake. And, like I said, those fish utilize, big portion of that water column. So, just, go into it knowing that, if you mix it up and you kind of vary your retrieve with, one of the four, types of jigs that we've talked about, you're going to have some success out there on the water.
Absolutely. Love that. It's just great. Like, and I think people need to mix it up more. We get so stuck in our ways, right, in fishing what we think works best that we truly limit ourselves on how many bass that we're throwing at are actually catchable. And sometimes it's as little as going up or down a size or changing the fluorocarbon size so that you increase or decrease the rate of fall of the lure that you're fishing. And that can be applied to any technique. It's just you need to find what the fish want to bite that day and don't make one cast and set it down. Make multiple casts and keep varying it up. And that's the importance of having multiple rods because you can tie on a bunch of different rods with different jigs or the same jigs on different types of setups and different trailers to see which one that the bass wants to bite on any given day. And every day in the winter, it can be different.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just, kind of talking about, like with forward facing sonar, especially, anglers have the ability now to go out and, find some fish to target. I
Yeah.
think that would be, some other advice I'd give you is go out there and find some fish and then, take these jigs and, throw all of them through them, see how they react to each one. If there's, you see some that follow it, but maybe aren't interested, or, you get some bites, maybe they're not, eating it good, you kind of start mixing it up from there. And that's, it's kind of all about putting that puzzle together. It's kind of what separates the pros from, the everyday guys is they can put that puzzle together a lot faster than, the average person. But,
Time on the water.
that's it.
So, well, Ricky, before I let you go here, is there anything else that you think we should touch on?
Yeah, I think it's pretty comprehensive there, but I would love to hear from the viewers if they think there's anything that we didn't touch on or anything that they would like to expand on in the future.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's something, with jigs especially, you can really go down some rabbit holes, with a lot of different stuff. But I think just with that information from those four jigs in particular, you should be able to have some success on the water, regardless of where you're at in the country. There's one of those jigs can fit the cover and structure that you're facing most places.
Yeah, it's cool. Like jig fishing, it might be one of the most simplistic ideologies when it comes to bass fishing, right? Like you're just going to throw a jig around and you're going to catch them. But there's so many specifics that go into it that separate a good jig fisherman from a great one, or even a bad one to a good one. So it's just always don't be afraid and always be willing to mess with your cadence a little bit on any given day to see how they'll eat it. Because and if there's crawfish in the lake, there's bluegill in the lake, they're always going to eat a jig as long as you're presenting it the way the bass wants. So, yeah. Well, Ricky, I appreciate you taking the time and recording this episode with us, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks again, I really appreciate you having me on, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. Thank you again.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, we'll chat soon. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for tuning into this week's episode here on the Lure Lab, where we were joined by Ricky Harris from Omnia Fishing and discussing all things cold water jig fishing. And as always, all the links are down below in the description in the MP3 or YouTube. If you are tuned in on YouTube and you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We greatly appreciate it. Leave comments down below, like Ricky said, if there's anything that you think we missed or you want to see from us in the future. We greatly appreciate that. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, MP3 side, if it allows you to leave a review, please do so. Helps the Lure Lab be seen by more people who want to get into bass fishing or want to learn more about bass fishing and all the techniques and ways to catch more bass. So until next week, we will see you then.